We are here to talk. The title of our presentation, of course, is Deserts No More, a people-centered approach to meaningful access in rural communities. How many of y'all are working for legal aid organizations that have a good coverage in rural areas?
Okay.
Very good. I mean, it's America, so it makes sense. Just quickly before we get started, we wanted to do some quick introductions. I'm Amanda Brown. I'm the founder and executive director of Lagniappe Law Lab, which is an access to justice technology nonprofit working in the Louisiana Civil Justice Center. And because we're here, I'm also a member of the LSC Emerging Leaders Council. So I love LSC, a former LSC attorney myself. But I'm here with two colleagues. I'll let Stephanie introduce herself and then Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Bowe. I am with the Louisiana State Bar Association. I am their Access to Justice, or one of their Access to Justice Projects Council. And one of the few of the communities that I work with in my role at the LSBA are self-represented litigants, technology committee, and our language access committee, and most recently our Justice for All project, which we'll be talking about today.
Good morning. Sorry, excuse my voice. I've lost it. So I'm going to try to make it through this last session of the morning. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I've tried cough drops and everything. I am Rachel Albertson from Legal Aid Service of Northeastern Minnesota. So the Northeastern region, we serve less populated area, but we cover over 1/3 of the state of Minnesota as far as geographical area. So that means a lot of rural population, people, and areas. So I'm here to talk about our project initiative, Reach Justice Minnesota, and the legal kiosks.
Which is a perfect segue into just a general overview of what we wanted to cover today. Interestingly, we are obviously Louisiana and Minnesota, two very different states. And as you'll see through the presentation, two different approaches in how we wanted to tackle increasing access in rural areas with surprisingly similar results, which is why we're on the panel together. So as Stephanie mentioned, this project is really coming out of a Justice for All grant, and then Rachel will talk about their funding for the kiosk project is coming from CARES Act funding. So just as a basic overview of kind of where we are going to go today, we wanted to talk and spend a little bit of time on how we got started with these projects, what were the drivers, and what that project initialization looked like. And then we're going to dig a little bit deeper into what our design and development work looked like. We have two different approaches there, so it's kind of an interesting back and forth. And we'll also do demonstrations of the technology that people in the rural communities interact with when they come to these legal access points and kiosks. And then, of course, we'll talk next steps, a little bit of lessons learned, just, nuggets of information that we learned along the way. And then we will have time for questions at the end. So getting into our project initialization, do you want to jump in?
So as Amanda mentioned, despite different funding structures and project initiations, both of our projects, Louisiana and Minnesota, we arrived at similar conclusions. In Louisiana, our work on this project first started in late of 2019 when the Louisiana Access to Justice Commission received what would be its first Justice for All grant from the National Center for State Courts. In the first phase of this project, our team was tasked with inventorying legal resources and assessing their effectiveness against the JFA components. And so our JFA team, of which Amanda was our project manager, when we got started in early 2020, COVID hit, and that changed everything. We had to pivot, and I think we actually became experts on pivoting. And instead, our JFA team had the opportunity to work with the SRL and group on a GIS mapping project. And Amanda's going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So we were able to work on that mapping project, and then using the data we collected from that and the NCSC's JFA components, our commission and our team underwent a full strategic planning process to identify goals and priorities that would address the gaps that were identified, one of which is the project we're discussing today.
So in Minnesota, we knew the gaps. COVID came. 2020, we applied, then CARES Act funding became available. So this was it. This was our chance. We looking at what the communities needed to attend court virtually and what COVID was bringing to the legal system. Quickly applied for CARES Act funding, and it was the state of Minnesota, well, the Civil Legal Services Organizations of Minnesota collaborated and applied together. So it's a statewide project. We received the CARES Act funding notification in late September, early October 2020, and had used the funds by December 31st. So it was go time, which is why it's interesting with Louisiana to talk about the projects, because we kind of did things backwards because we had to. So basically Minnesota got the money. It depended on, and then we were just procuring the technology, getting the host sites, talking to community partners, and then worked backwards.
And Stephanie mentioned the Justice for All grant. How many of y'all are familiar with the National Center for State Courts Justice for All initiative? It's just as a quick overview, there's the National Center for Courts obviously has this Justice for All initiative, and they give out grants for, or they were, I'm not sure if they're still doing it anymore, but giving out grants to do statewide, like asset mapping, inventorying across these components. And they have a website. I was just going to plug that and recommend that if you're not familiar with it, they have a lot of resources for you to get a bigger picture of your ecosystem. Because that's really what led us to identify that we had these gaps that, and put some strategy behind, how we were going to address that. So in Louisiana, as Stephanie mentioned, experts at pivoting at this point, we had these funds to go out into the community to do community listening sessions and town halls style research in rural communities in Louisiana. I think our first event was supposed to be on March 17th, 2020, and March 15th is when the governor issued the stay-at-home order. So we were at a bit of a loss because we'd done a lot of planning, tried, done outreach in the community, worked with community partners to get people in a room that was suddenly, dangerous to go into. So we got creative and we're really just looking at the purpose of this and trying to figure out, okay, what were we trying to learn from this experience? And ultimately we wanted to learn who the people were in these communities, who made up our rural communities in Louisiana. And we also had the added benefit of using this geospatial information systems to map to do some of that asset mapping and compare those things. So ultimately, that was a very useful tool and experience for us, all things considered. We're taking it as a silver lining. So we put together a quick, I called it a geodata hackathon so we could get law students looped into helping us build out a data set that represented the physical resources, justice resources that we had in Louisiana. That looks like courts, physical legal aid offices, self-help centers, law libraries, all the places in real life that people could go, which was ironic considering nobody could go anywhere at this point, but I digress. And then worked with the Self-Represented Litigation Network to put this information and use other American Community Survey data, as I mentioned, to overlay these things and get a picture about how and where people can access services in Louisiana. So this map here, the purple represents a place. There's some place in there or people can drive under 45 minutes to get to some type of civil legal resource in our state, which we could debate all day about whether that's even a realistic statistic for many people. As we uncovered, transportation issues are a problem for people. But even so, you can see that outside of that purple area, there's a huge percentage of our state that doesn't really have access to some type of in-person resource. So the red, from yellow to red, is on this particular map is representing our poverty in our state. So this was a really sobering and eye-opening moment for us to see that the most, vulnerable, the poorest people in our state don't have access to legal aid services. And this was, also reflected in other maps that were produced as part of this project based on like case volume from our LSC grantees. So this has become, it was like a lightning rod to send us into some type of action in order to address this, get out into these communities, build awareness, and then ultimately build resources for them. So the areas outside the purple are the civil legal resource deserts. And they are law students, but it was the Access to Justice Commission's leadership internship program. Which, if you don't have one of those, is also a great way to cultivate access to justice leaders. I think it's very effective. So this was really a catalyst for us to use this information to create a strategic plan and goals for how we were going to address this as a smaller subset of the larger strategic plan that came out of that initial Justice for All project. This is, basically, this is what the strategic plan looks like from our end. Those JFA components are very comprehensive. They cover technology, consumer satisfaction, feedback loops, opportunities for people to be involved in justice system activities. And we had these 5 main strategic goals. And really, this is, as I mentioned, really only a smaller subset of that. Yeah. You want to jump in on that?
Sure. It is really kind of the 5 listed on the left are broad, kind of overarching themes. Our actual strategic plan was probably about 6 or 7 pages long.
And that was after they cut my 30-page document.
And with, very detailed priorities. So we did focus after, through the strategic planning process, we have these broad goals, but we had identified and focused on certain priorities underneath there. So such as, building awareness and support through the distribution or communication of our GIS findings. We did that through press releases, particularly in rural areas where we were going to target some outreach and, development of some sort of legal resource. We did bar journals, we did presentations for not just lawyers and judges, but for community members as well and community leaders. We also pursued mandatory access to justice training for judges and court staff. I will say the mandatory part has been very difficult, surprise, but we have been doing a lot of training with them. Cross trainings with non-legal referral mechanisms and expanding our existing legal referral systems. Also increasing, centralizing self-help resources via access points and standardizing forms that we have. And that's highlighted here and with a box around it because this is the reason we're here. This is the part of our project that comes into play for this presentation today. And then last, one thing we focused on was expanding lawyer and litigant participation in things like alternative dispute resolution and limited scope representation.
And like I said, what the impetus was COVID and how our rural community members going to be able to access the legal system virtually. So that was the main purpose of why it happened so quickly and why we applied for CARES Act funding. The user experience expanded on that a little bit when we were able to take a minute. And unfortunately, not have the time and the strategic planning as Louisiana, but come up with, in the end, some self-help resources along with technology access points in rural Minnesota, and access to legal services, civil legal services to apply. So I won't go over all the bullet points here, but that was our planning and priorities, and it happened, as I said, in 2 months, and we just had to make some quick decisions and then get to the user experience after.
All right, so now you have a good picture of how we kind of got to this point, what drove our decision to pursue this as a strategy for expanding access. So we want to take some time to just do essentially case studies on how we did design and development. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we'll do demos as well. So just jumping into our process in Louisiana, it was very protracted. It was very intense. It was a very rich experience. I don't know what it says that we ultimately resulted in very similar, end results, but take that piece of information for what you will. But as I mentioned, we really went through this full kind of design phase where we're doing discovery, doing outreach into the community, doing surveys, community partnerships. You want to talk about some of those?
Yeah. So after the GIS mapping project, and as Amanda showed on the map that was displayed, you could see there were those civil legal resource deserts, particularly in that upper northeast corner of Louisiana, where it was really red, so really high poverty, and over 45 minutes away from the nearest civil legal resource. So legal aid, self-help desk, law library. So we knew, and they call it the Mississippi Delta region. So we knew our focus was going to be there. We had very high poverty with no access to resources at all. So being that these were also very rural areas, we knew and recognized that partnerships with the community were going to be essential to the work that we were doing. And we had already had contacts, very strong contacts with librarians, because our Access to Justice Commission hosts annual Lawyers in Libraries events. So we knew we could at least start there. So we started with the librarians in those areas, particularly in East Carroll Parish and Concordia Parish. We have, just for those who don't know, Louisiana has parishes, not counties. So we focused on those areas, reach out to those librarians, and first started hosting community leader roundtables. So the librarians were able to use their connections with local leaders such as mayors, police juries, school board representatives. We reached out to local judges in the area, community action agencies, and DAs, public defenders, brought these people together, these community leaders, explained the goals of what we were trying to do, but then focused on their issues. What are they seeing in their community? Where do people first go? Where do their community members first go to get help? Were there any barriers to getting help? And then we also asked things about, how did they communicate with their community members, or were there newsletters, or did they use social media, trying to get a full understanding of the community members in these areas. So after we made these connections with these local leaders, we then formed our JFA steering committee, who were going to help us accomplish the goals that we identified through our strategic planning process. And from there, we started again planning community listening sessions, because they were originally canceled in March of 2020, as Amanda explained. As luck would have it, Louisiana was hit with one of the most devastating storms to hit our region with Hurricane Ida. And so that unfortunately and it was actually, Ida hit the day before our first community listening session was planned. As I said, we became experts in pivoting. So
we're on the phone talking to each other, like, should we go up there? I'm like, there's a tree blocking every exit to my neighborhood. I don't think I can leave.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't have power. So unfortunately we had to cancel those, and we rescheduled them in a few months. We put it on pause because our state started focusing on recovering and disaster issues. So we put it on pause. A couple months later, we were planning again. We were set to go. And then there was a COVID breakout in many areas of the state. We had spikes in COVID. We took safety measures, but we proceeded with one of the community listening sessions, and we quickly realized people were scared. And so we pivoted again. But this time we decided, okay, we're going to do a survey. So we focused on developing a survey and a distribution plan. We relied on those community leaders we had identified through the roundtables. And our survey focused on, people's past experiences getting help, legal help, their comfort level, their experience with, and their access to technology, and their legal and service delivery needs and preferences. And so through this, we were able to get some results. And we did end up talking to some people. We relied very heavily on libraries for having hard copies and electronic copies of the surveys and distributing them to library patrons. We had flyers that were, distributed in the bookmobiles throughout the state. We did direct mailers, which we found were also helpful. Social media ads, which were actually a little less helpful.
I think we learned that Facebook ads, don't spend your money on that.
But through that, we were able to distribute this survey and actually learn and speak to a few folks that answered it and learn a few things, which I think we'll talk about soon.
Yeah, so the big focus was on, and we also, I think, did a check-in on what people's legal needs actually were, which we oddly enough discovered, maybe it's not oddly enough, but the legal needs reflected in the rural communities were far different from what we expected and what we usually would see in a more urban area. So that was a really helpful check against our assumptions, and just leaning into having the community participate and having their voice heard that would ultimately all be used in the design that we implemented. So, of course,
What were the needs? What sorts of needs came up?
Of course, a lot of different public benefits. And energy assistance was really large in the rural communities that we talked to. We have a very niche, maybe it's not a niche, but successions issues are extremely common in rural areas.
Air property.
Air property.
In particular.
Disaster survivors often can't access federal benefits because they can't prove that they have title to their home. So those are very prevalent. And people just live in the home for generations and generations without passing it down. Things like housing that are super common or, very prolific in urban areas, people didn't seem as concerned about in those areas. So it was just a different mix of things that we wanted to make sure when we rolled out that we had resources for those problems so that this place would be useful for them. So all that input really helped us finalize of course, the legal issues that we need to make sure that we address. But more than anything, it was extremely illuminating in what we know kind of inherently through working in access to justice is that people have a lot of different needs. They also come for help at different points in time over their legal journey. So we really needed to make sure that this place was somewhere that unfortunately, anybody at any time with any problem can access. Like that sounds like the easiest problem to solve, right? So we really focused on making this a spectrum of services that people could access so that no matter where they were on their journey, whether they were just getting started or whether they felt, some readiness to take action on that or, they're ready to or they have the capability to go to court on that we could support that in this physical space for them so that they weren't forced to take, entire days off of work to be driven 2 hours to go to a court hearing or, rely on advice from other community members that maybe they're not qualified to give, legal advice or things like that. And then we also had to be real about the fact that these places are 2, 3, 4 hours away from our in-person resources who are, like our legal aid organizations, they're already strapped for their own time and resources, and they're focused on servicing the clients that come into them already. So there was really no getting around that this has to be some physical space for people to go, but accepting the reality that we have to bridge that with digital services in order to make sure people can have access, even if it might be a little bit uncomfortable.
One thing I wanted to point out too on that note. So part of the data collected, we uncovered or realized that in East Carroll Parish alone, there are 3 attorneys in the entire parish. One of them is a judge, one of them is a DA. So they're not representing people that need the help or have the issues that we were hearing about. And in addition to that, the nearest legal aid office was over an hour and a half away. So when we really realized we needed to bridge that gap.
And then, just as part of that survey, and again, we all have like this understanding that people in rural communities don't have as much access to technology in their own homes, and that can affect your, technical literacy, the digital literacy that you have. But I would say I was actually pleasantly surprised with the survey results that we got and people's ability. Everybody has a smartphone. At least it's connected to, what is that? Not Wi-Fi. What is the one with the towers? Cellular network. The brain fog is here. But we had to understand and recognize that people have different digital literacy, desires for interacting with technology. So all of this information really played into what the final design looked like. And then also the fact that we're putting this in a place that people might be going not for that particular thing, and they might not be there at that time to use that. So they don't have time to, or an interest to, sit down and spend 30 minutes researching a legal issue. And that wasn't their plan. They were just going to the library, to bring their book back. But it became, sort of something special in the library, for you to look at that ultimately was kind of a driver to help people realize that they might have a problem and that this could be a potential way for them to address that. So we moved from that into just, a full design plan, taking all these inputs that we had, all this information from the survey and from feedback from the community partners to do very rough design mock-ups. Maybe I'm one of those people that I picture things in my head and I was like, I don't need to do this. And then I was like trying to communicate it to people and it wasn't getting through. So we moved to this version of just like, okay, there's 2 components to this. There's a technology enabled space. That's very important terminology. It's very intentional terminology. And then we also have a programming component that ties into all that. So you see here, this is like what the initial design mock-up looked like. It's a private space for people. Of course, we recognize that the legal issues are complicated. They're personal. People need privacy, even if they're just looking up information. I don't want this person I know in my community looking over my shoulder see that I'm looking up, how to enforce child support against somebody. Privacy is obviously very important. But the physical components that tie into that were really an effort to make sure that we're not just leaning on technology to get this done. So you see in the picture here represented, we have things like brochures and of course, normal things like making sure we can enable people to print and take things away if they want to, and clear instructions. All this kind of ties into their experience interacting with the place that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with the software or like completing a specific task that we hope they would eventually get to. So we looked at the exterior of this as a way to almost draw people in. Using things like brochures and court forms that address those immediate needs. You just want to take it away. I don't have time for this, but this is relevant to me. I'll take it. Brochures that we specifically designed to be somewhat like lead generators almost to let you get a snapshot of what your legal issue is, what are the basic, like fundamental things you need to know, the basic process. And then the action being, oh, hey, this thing can help you. Like, we can give you more information if you want to go in. And then we also incorporated, because some of the physical aspects are harder to track, to see, like, is this useful to people? We use QR codes as well to, if you took it away and you have your iPhone, you can scan it and you could go to the resources. This is not exclusive to this place. You can, visit these resources on like our Law Help website, or, produce an automated court form from your phone. That's totally fine if you can do that. But, having that as some way to draw people in and help them get some context about what this thing is for, because it just says legal help on it. That doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but if they see the issues that they're having, these brochures were driven by the research that we had done, reflected in these materials. That's like a signal for them to move into, all right, let me take some next steps on this. So, and then on the software side, like once we get them in there, we really, as I mentioned, we're looking towards the spectrum of services and enabling people to accomplish a variety of legal related tasks while they were in at the access point and using it. But it has to be simple. We have all these complex legal problems, but at the end of the day, we want to make sure that people could learn about their legal issue, that they could see where they could go for help, see what kind of programs they qualify for, have access to self-help resources and forms, join a meeting with their lawyer, which is actually tied to partnership development with our legal service organizations and developing systems for them to refer their clients that don't want to drive an hour and a half to the closest office to do a virtual, consultation with them, and doing all that. And then in certain jurisdictions in Louisiana, only certain, we have online court hearings enabled. So that's also a space for judges in the community to send their, send the people that are supposed to be attending court hearings into this space as well. That ended up being everything for now, though we have ideas about, future tasks. But that's really the core concept of the design and all the thought that went into, making something that we hope, would be accessible. And this is the implementation. This is kind of what it looks like. So in our, we have 3 locations at this point. They're all private spaces, and it's really, as we mentioned, like a full kind of experience. In 2 of those locations, we have phone booths, essentially. They're little privacy phone booths that people can go into, and you see the brochures are hanging on the wall. We have a feedback box. And then I forgot to mention the program. Do you want to talk about the programming?
So another layer to implementing these access points was, as Amanda mentioned, we really strengthened our relationship and partnership with the legal aid organizations that serve those areas we were focusing on. And so we also developed a programming component where we're hosting quarterly webinars on important legal topics that the community has indicated through the surveys that are important to them and they want to learn more about. And so our locations for these access points are 2 are in libraries, 1 is in a community action agency. And so we've ensured that they have space to host in-person people and they can display a Zoom webinar. And so we're able to kind of do this hybrid in-person virtual programming, which we do after hours, right, as of now, on a quarterly basis, where, community members can go to the library, sit and watch the webinar, and then at the end, they can actually, go up to the computer and ask their question to the attorney and have it answered if they have any. So we're calling them Law Talks. They're also being live streamed on our Lawyers and Libraries page, so that if anyone needs help and, or wants to view them later, they can. But that's another component to our access points.
And touching on that briefly, that was a consideration a scale consideration for us, because a lot of the comments that we heard from library staff, from people in the community, was that they just want to talk to somebody, right? Like that's what you probably hear in your organizations. I've been spinning my wheels. I just need to talk to somebody to like figure out what's out there, what's next. So it's not reasonable to think that even on 3 locations that we're going to send somebody, 3 hours, back and forth to do a presentation for an hour in person. And you can't even guarantee that people will show up. So the streaming component was, a scale consideration so that we just have one person that's presenting. We have great presenters from our legal service organizations that are providing the content for those. And then again, ultimately with this looking sort of like a way to guide people to this, more robust experience where they can follow through on things. So all of this consideration about like, how do we attract people to it? How do we get them there? We have to offer them something of value. So that's kind of how we looked at these approaches. And what ultimately turned this into a massive program. It's not just like, some software that we can put in the library at this point anymore. Like we're, having more formal conversations about maybe we should have, I forgot the abandonware session. She's like, maybe we should have more conversations about this in the beginning, about like how we're going to sustain this and keep it going. We had ideas, but the reality of the situation is that before we knew what we were going to do, we didn't know what we would need to sustain. But we have committed, lots of committed people in Louisiana, so I'm not worried about it at all. And we're already on the, path to looking at scaling these out in other locations. But so far, the reception in the community, most communities, has been really good. So, yes.
In the slides to the left, is that one of the phone booth style?
It is, yes.
Who's your manufacturer for that?
Okay, so we use Pillar Booth. That's the little tag at the bottom. They were really great to work with, actually. I'm not a salesperson, obviously, but they do give discounts. So that was nice. I thought it was affordable. Each of these locations, all things considered, if you're going with the booth option, it's probably less. I would say it's less than $15,000. And that I would count like you paying somebody to have like project management in on that, like, implementation support. So I think it's it's pretty affordable.
And we were worried that it would look too weird, that people would be afraid to use it in these rural areas. And the opposite was actually true. So it's so unique when they walk in and they see it, they're like, what is this? Mm-hmm. And immediately go inside and start, looking around like, oh, I didn't know I needed this. So that was good.
So we have other accommodations for people that have accessibility needs. We've spoken, though, in one library, it's an openly accessible space. It's an already existing room that they had in the library. So that wasn't an issue, but we have worked to make sure that the library partners have other alternatives for them to access. Yeah, that was definitely a big conversation around like recognizing that we could do this, or we could pay someone to build a room in a library. And I don't know if you're really going to convince, we almost convinced one library to do it, but the cost considerations of that when there are, good alternatives available, this just made sense. And to be honest, as Stephanie said, like it's so weird. You just have to know what it is. Like people are naturally drawn to it. And I think that has attributed to some of the success in using in the places that have that versus the other location where it's an existing room that wasn't being used anyway. It's in the back of the library. You try to put as much signage as you can, but there's no draw to that. So that was definitely a lesson learned in that. Any more questions on design or stuff? Yes. So we worked with the library partners to just try to identify a good space. This was a small rural library. They already had stuff in the way, but they were happy to move stuff to accommodate this. So, I mean, it's really just next to their other computer banks. It's just, private. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah. Okay. Lots of, yes, go ahead.
So with those booths, you mentioned before people being maybe nervous to look stuff up online and have somebody look over their shoulder. But if they're in that booth, it's very obvious they're there for a law reason.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. I guess you can't see the substance of it, but you're right. That is
Well, no, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, has anyone reported any issue with that?
not that we have heard.
No.
We have asked the libraries, like, how's it going? What are like people's receptiveness to it, and it's been positive. So, yes. Yes, right.
When would you demo?
Yeah, I'll do a demo and then say it's more the first, like, here's the information that you need to like contact this organization. We're undergoing a case management system transition right now. So in the future, we hope to automate that a little bit better, but it didn't make sense at this time to do that. So I'll go ahead and do a quick demonstration. This is literally just like a slightly more stylized version of what you saw on the Figma mockup. Really just representing the activities that we wanted to enable people to accomplish at these access points. So for folks that want to learn about their legal issue, we do have supporting content, and we can drive them to supporting content for I think it's 80 to 90 civil legal issues. Most of that being through our Law Help platform, the content that lives there. And then in other cases, we have more guided experiences for the higher need issues like family law, divorce, custody, work issues, housing, things like that. But essentially, they'll just get. This is using the latest version of the National Subject Matter Index that has been kind of reconfigured to speak more to how people recognize their problems and understand them, so that we can drive them, to the right resource. So, for example, in this case, we don't have a very detailed experience or like guided experience for folks that need information on housing after disaster yet, but we do have really good high quality content on it already. So we're just driving them to those resources that we have. And the beauty of this is that my organization manages Louisiana Law Help, and I have my content development manager here somewhere. She's doing a good job making sure we keep adding and having these resources available for the community. But this is, that's how they might find information about one issue. And then, as I mentioned, in more high volume areas, we do have, as part of another project that we've been working on, guided experiences. So this is a good layer on top of like all the resources that we have in our state, no matter what we have and like where we are in the maturity of those projects, letting people connect to those resources at the access points. So like, as I mentioned, we have a guided experience for divorce that I'm not going to demonstrate right now because that's not the point of this, but that's what folks that are looking for information, that's what they can do and how they can access statewide resources that we have. And then on qualifying for looking for legal help problems, my cookies are bad. We have another referral engine, like a referral navigator for people to get, information about their household size, their income, where they are, what their problem is, and then matching them with the programs that they are most likely to qualify for in their area. So if they're low income, they're going to see legal aid organizations. They're going to see things like, other free resources that we have, free legal answers, if they're middle income, they'll see less, less and less until they get up to high income. And then it's just like, well, here's the Bar Association referral. But the point being that kind of no matter who's using this, they'll at least have some guidance about who they can contact and to get help. So that's kind of the goal of reaching out for help. We also have a small but growing library of forms, and I'll step back in this because, as I mentioned earlier, we are letting legal aid organizations also use this obviously as an access point to send folks to. We have options for self-help forms, but we also are building out things like automations for retainer agreements and consent to electronic contact, the business forms that the legal aid organizations need to use. So that we talked about this briefly or with the organizations, like what's the workflow going to be like if we send somebody to this place? They can't drive, they don't have transportation, don't want to take off all day of work to go visit. What do you need? Like, what's the baseline paperwork that you need? And we're like, well, we could email it to them, all these not so efficient systems. So that's the idea behind letting them have access to some of these forms on here as well. And then for folks that are just looking for self-help, we have, as Stephanie mentioned, as part of our bigger strategic plan is like more statewide approved forms. So it's a small list at the moment, but
It's a slow process, but we have buy-in from the people we need buy-in from, and we're moving with it. So
yes. So they can access, we have automated versions of some that have kind of gone through that process. And then for other types, they're just, fillable PDF versions. But yes.
What platform did you use to build the tool?
So I built this on Webflow, which is like low code, I would say. I'm not a developer, but I did this just fine. So you can figure it out. Yes.
I'm interested to know your approach with this for individuals that their primary language isn't English.
Yeah, this is conversations that we've had. As Stephanie mentioned, she's on the Language Access Committee. We haven't taken steps to implement that as of yet.
we're discussing how we can. We do have court forms that have been translated because Louisiana does have a language access plan that was approved. And so there are translations and we can direct folks to them, but trying to implement it into this project, we're still working on.
Have you tried to integrate the private bar into this so that the bar members who are living in the more populated areas agree to take remote referrals from people in the world?
This is definitely the conversation that we're having. So we just launched these in August of, I guess that's the last of August of last year. So we're still getting our bearings from like how this is going to be used, like how it's being accepted. But that is certainly one of the considerations that we think about as we design like these other like ancillary services and processes that we want to enable pro bono volunteers to also use this so they can schedule and they can do consults. So that really is like one place for people to go, which is unfortunately a really tall order.
Yeah. And unfortunately at our state bar, which I work for, we do not have a referral system for private bar members. Those are, if one exists, they're at a private bar level, not the statewide bar level. So that is a conversation that is ongoing.
We have a lot of structural challenges.
Yes.
But we're doing the best that we can and putting the things in place so that while Stephanie and I tag team through these committees and like hopefully encourage changes structurally, that we have a place, to let it loose. But that's the form side of things. Joining a meeting with a lawyer is a very simple flow. These they're loaded with Zoom, the video conferencing. This is, again, I would call this a prototype at this point. But I built a system that basically, if you put in your name. If you have an appointment today at this time based off of a scheduling system that we created on the back end, you'll get a Zoom link, and it will open up, your meeting with the attorney that it was scheduled for you. We're not, just letting people come in yet to just meet live on demand with an attorney, but I want to do that someday. And then joining the court hearing is the same kind of workflow. Each jurisdiction has their own virtual court, or like video conferencing instructions. So we're just directing them there, so we don't have to do anything with that.
We're a non-unified court system, so this is kind of one step in the closest way we can get to something being uniform. We can send them to these court websites. So one thing I did want to point out too, if you want to go back to the main page,
This page.
there's a phone number up at the top. So we did hear from some survey respondents about not wanting to use technology. They want to just talk to someone. So our law library of Louisiana, which is run through our Supreme Court, said, hey, we have someone who answers these calls all the time. We don't mind if you put our phone number up there for people to call us, and they can help direct them. So that was another kind of layer to all of this to really help address some of those barriers with technology.
Yeah, so we just enabled that through like a Skype, system in the booth itself, and people can call the law library. I do need to change this. Technical debt is real, y'all. In testing, I asked people to find this, and it was hard for them. So updates need to be made, but that's part of, I think it's just part of the learning process. But I mean, I think as you can see, like we're trying to bring all these different layers of partnerships and resources that we have together so that people have a broad spectrum of services in this place. And I think, hopefully someday this will just be a way that people interact with our justice system online. So if there's no more questions about that, I'm done with the demo, and I will turn it over to Rachel.
Yeah, so I'll try to go. Oh my gosh, I apologize. Gonna try to get through this last session. Okay, Minnesota really needed access points, and we had a different view from the beginning because we were the Minnesota Legal Services Coalition, which meant a group of Minnesota legal service providers that this project came from. So the Minnesota Legal Service Coalition applied for the funds. In Minnesota, it's geographically located. So there were 4 hubs, we call them. So Northeast Minnesota, Northwest, Mid-Minnesota, and Southern Minnesota. And we needed program management because of the fast timeline. Obviously, there's no way to do this yourself. So A to J Tech helped us, and were really instrumental in getting this project out. So our design considerations were, from the legal services standpoint, rural people they may have a smartphone, but in Minnesota, even if you're in an urban area, you don't have service all the time, especially in rural areas. So bad service, poor service, even if you knew a website to get to, even cell service is sketchy. So there's no guarantee. So when the legal system went virtual, it absolutely disproportionately impacted legal services clients. So what we wanted to focus on were access points that provided consistent internet access, so there would be no question. So if someone's at home and needed to get online to their virtual court hearing, they weren't kicked off or they couldn't. And then there was changes through the court system through COVID because nobody knew how to navigate this, right? And so then courts and certain judges were demanding people be on video. They couldn't just be on voice for their hearing, which then uses more internet. It also then impacted more people who didn't have the ability to use video. So at the end of the day, what we came up with was we have legal kiosks, and they're two, so these are pictures of the two different types that we have. The one on the stand, it's really a medical cart, which is physically able to move up and down to be accessible. And those we put in public areas. So really, anyone walking by will see the home screen of the Minnesota Legal Kiosk and can see what actions they can take. We made it very simple. And then the other one right next to it that's on the desk is located at community partner organizations in a private location. So we, unlike Louisiana, didn't have a self-contained private location for our other models. We relied on community partners, which they've been amazing, especially in rural areas. I will say when we called them, a lot of them were libraries like Louisiana, just because that's where people go for information, right? When you need to print something and you don't have a printer, you go to the library. It's just a good community space. So they were more than willing to put it in a location that was private for people to attend hearings. So those are the two different models. We call them a kiosk, even though they're computers on a medical cart or a desk, and both of them physically go lower and raise for accessibility purposes. But the kiosk portion is really the software end of it, where there's timers set. So if people walk away from their session, the kiosk software on the back end will restart the computer and there's no data saved. So that was a primary focus, was the confidentiality part, because people are putting sensitive information in and we don't want to store that anywhere, which also led to data challenges, which we'll talk about later. This is the main user experience screen. So we wanted to keep it really basic. What do you need to do? Do you need to apply for legal help? So there's about 270 across the state of Minnesota. And where the button goes geographically correlates with that service area, the legal aid that serves physically where that kiosk is located. Join a video meeting just connects to Zoom, because that's what district courts were all using at the time. There were some administrative hearings that were done by WebEx and a few random others, but most everything was done by Zoom. And so now that we have time and have spent time going back and refining the experience, we're looking at putting other video options onto the legal kiosk homepage, but it was just Zoom. And then browse legal topics goes to kind of the homepage that Louisiana. It looks the same because it goes to our Law Help MN self-help library, which our hope was that if people went there to browse legal topics, they could see the most generally used big topic areas of civil legal issues, right? Because a lot of people don't even know what a civil legal issue, like, is it a civil legal issue? I don't know. So it is not locked down. It's an actual computer. We have minimal restrictions on where you can go, because the other part of the issue was people checking emails, getting documents from their attorney, from the court, and we wanted people to access that. So thinking through, do we put Gmail and Yahoo and the 15 other possibilities of emails on there, or do we leave it open? And we decided to leave it open and restrict only certain websites that people can't go to, and obviously some content restrictions. And then in the top, you can see the 4 different languages that we have it translated into. So it's just a button. And those are the 4 languages that are most used in Minnesota, and also the 4 languages that Law Help MN is translated into. So it kind of made sense, since we're referring people to get legal information from Law Help, that we're using the same 4 main languages. the apply here goes directly to, like I said, the online application for the legal aid that geographically coordinates with where that kiosk is located. Okay, and I will demonstrate. So this is the main legal kiosk homepage. So if you push start here, this is our, at the moment, our data collection, which is a voluntary
What's wrong?
Sorry. Nobody, so this is our data collection at the moment. Voluntary people can just not answer and skip through, and then we can count the session as far as when a kiosk is being used. If they provide other information, that's great. It gives us insight. So this just goes directly to, this would be in a service area of Legal Aid Service of Northeastern Minnesota. And then launch Zoom just goes, they would need the Zoom meeting info. So whether that's on a court notice of remote hearing or what we've learned over the time that these have been out and about in Minnesota is that people need Zoom for more than court hearings. Obviously, as civil legal service providers, we were focused on people being able to attend to their court hearings, but a lot of people have used them for job interviews, telehealth, holistically, kind of everything that goes with civil legal services to make just make somebody's world function in a virtual world, especially right during COVID, right? So this is not restricted to the Minnesota Judicial Branch or any Zoom meeting link will do, which includes, we did a lot of training with internally with civil legal services staff to provide instructions on referring people to these so that if they're an hour away from our office, they don't need to drive there. There could be a kiosk within 10 minutes, right? Or at a community office that's in their community, and then we would meet with them virtually. And then I am so sorry. The self-help library, again, this is Law Help Emmett. So it can take you to different places. But the issues are all what's on Law Help Emmett.
The reverse Mac scroll.
Got it. I'm all confused. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I want to give you guys time for questions. So I think I addressed like the questions that you all asked Louisiana, but I'm happy to answer any more about Minnesota. And I would just say that how we made this happen and how it's successful is community partners. And I couldn't say more with rural community partners, and that's being domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters, food support in the community. They've all opened up the doors, and I will say librarians really knew. Like when we called and proposed this project, just like Louisiana, they knew, they were excited. We barely had to explain it, and they have people asking them legal questions all the time, right? And it's just different to refer them to a phone number than to say, oh, we have a legal kiosk in this room and you can sit down here and look at information or apply for legal services right here, or here's the phone number you can call.
Tell us how many of those sites you set up. It's really impressive.
We have 270.
Our cute little 3.
Yeah.
To be fair, we had $100,000 over
Yeah.
the year. I built this for free, basically.
Yeah.
Like it's a different scale of
Different
a
scale.
project.
Listen, we're legal aid. We got the money. CARES Act said, here's a couple $1 million. Use it, right? And we had to use it. We're not going to turn down the opportunity to have access points all across Minnesota. You can only have so many legal aid offices. So,
Yeah.
Reach Justice, the overarching initiative, that also used some of that money. We also got 4 Justice buses in Minnesota. So the kiosks are where community people can find us, right? They go to their community, the places they visit to access points, and the Justice buses are what we take to go to the people. So that's kind of like, but yeah, a lot of them. We had to use the money.
Can we have some? All right. Well, if there's no questions on that, we do have time for questions. We could be quick about our next steps. It's just normal technology project things, gathering, continuing to gather feedback, hopefully continuing to work on scaling this out to other locations that have a need, and then focusing on that partnership building aspect. And then, as I mentioned before, refining the product, and keep making it better for everybody to use. And then Minnesota.
Yeah, we're gonna, believe it or not, in that short time frame, we did do user testing. Probably not as much as we did, but just to make the user experience, make sure we were confident that it was going to help people. But we want to continue on that. Since it's been out, and we really want to get good data. So we applied for a TIG grant and received that. So we're going to start that this year of refining the software to really keep confidentiality on these kiosks so people feel comfortable, but allowing us some way, which I don't know yet, but the TIG will help us find a way to collect all the good data that we want to collect without imposing on people's privacy. So that's our next steps.
And yeah, lessons learned. We kind of talked throughout. I feel like one thing that we learned, simple doesn't mean that it's easy to accomplish. In fact, it's the opposite. What is it? I don't want to butcher it. Something about the brilliance of simplicity that I saw in this building somewhere. But yeah, documentation. You guys have a lot of documentation that we're behind.
Well, so I will say, yes, documentation is important. I think for no matter how many, if you have 3 or 200, but getting them out into the community, we couldn't personally train everyone. We couldn't even personally set all of these up. They were shipped. Like the community partners wanted access points so much that they were willing to accept all of these shipped parts and pieces and put it together. But they also needed training. So we did webinars, but we have a really great knowledge base that A to J Tech put together as we were going through this process to document everything. So.
And then you
It helps
already
go.
mentioned the
Yeah.
community partnerships.
Yeah, those are vital.
All right. We underestimated how long it would take to get
We
through
did.
that. So questions, yes.
Could you say a little bit more about the bus?
The bus, yes. I cannot believe I don't have a picture of the
It seems to me
buses.
that in terms of reaching people, putting the kiosk out is
Hmm.
so much more effective. The bus, you're gonna have to schedule it, you're gonna have to, and how does it work?
Yeah, so the Justice buses are, so again, there's 4 of them in Minnesota, so they cover 1 for each legal aid geographically. So they're essentially vans, and they are set up with an office in the back. So, and they have technology, so they have a computer hookup with an extra screen, a desk, a seat for a client, wheelchair ramp at the back. And they have, I don't know, I can't remember the name of what's on the top, that some fancy thing that gets like internet access in rural areas because I have
Starlink.
yeah, it's something like that. Okay, so the Justice Bus, we have used it for many things that we never even thought we would. So marketing, because it's wrapped with, they all look alike with Law Help MN on the back, but on the sides are the individual names of our programs and our phone numbers, but they're all the same color. So anyway, we have used them at parades, clinics, a point in time count Minnesota has to address homeless like one day. They have all these homeless clinics where they provide a lot of services. That's a really big one. But really any community event, people can request us to come or we schedule with communities. So probably that for me personally, the one that's been the most successful is partnering with Second Harvest Food Pantry, which in Minnesota is the big, like it's basically a semi that goes to rural areas in my service area, to deliver food. People know and depend on that semi. They know when it's coming. Like Second Harvest has been around forever. So we partner with them, kind of going back to the community partnerships, and I would just follow with the Justice Bus. The people were already there, right? And that's a lot of our client population. And so they would see us and come and talk to us. And then more than likely in that community, we have a legal kiosk. So while they come and talk to us, we could do an intake, but we could also tell them about this resource because you can't always be there, right?